The U.S.-Canada border is anything but ordinary, which sets itself apart with its history. In this video, we're getting into the interesting world of the U.S.-Canada border, a fascinating history, the disputes that persist, and the quirky anomalies that define this massive 5,525-mile-long divide, from islands claimed by both nations to the border crossing through lakes. Stick around until the end to discover how this complex border came into existence and why it matters even in seemingly uninhabited areas. Many border crossings typically fit into one of two rather dull categories, either boring or sometimes even more boring. Long lines of people that appear to stretch endlessly and cars idly emitting exhaust fumes can make the unavoidable process of moving from point A to point B quite uninteresting. The idea that all border crossings are dull doesn't fit the U.S.-Canada border. It can be fascinating and distinct, with diverse experiences and attractions. It breaks the stereotype of a boring border. Despite the friendly relations, both countries have made a point of marking their territorial divide by creating a 20-foot-wide strip along the entire 5,525-mile-long border, recognized as the no-touching zone. You might think, there must be some progress. Well, no, there are still disagreements. Some islands in the Atlantic are claimed by both the United States and Canada. They even built a lighthouse on one of them, but it's a bit of a puzzle. There are other weird parts of the border, too. Sometimes it goes through lakes and cuts off a piece of land. This happened because a long time ago, they didn't have good maps, and they had to guess where the border should go. This particularly happened because people in the 1800s had to mark the border, and let's be honest, they did their best with compasses and strings, but it wasn't super accurate. They put up over 900 markers to show the border, and these markers connect the dots for the no-touching zone. Even if this zone happens to traverse hundreds of miles through remote Alaskan or Yukon wilderness, those border trees will not be allowed to remain. You might assume this is the longest, straightest deforested stretch on the planet, but that's not the case. It's indeed deforested, but it's far from being straight. It may appear straight on maps, and the treaties dictate that it's straight. But in reality, the official border consists of 900 lines zigzagging away from the horizontal by as much as several hundred feet. So how did this convoluted border come to be? Well, picture yourself back in the 1800s in North America. The 49th parallel, one of those horizontal lines on the globe, has been established as the national boundary, and it's your task to bring it to life. Armed with only a compass and a ball of string, you're tasked with meticulously marking off the next 2/3 of a continent. No need to worry about the uncharted wilderness in your path. Just keep that line straight. Good luck with that. The surveyors of the time did their utmost and built over 900 monuments. They did a reasonably good job given the limitations of a pre-GPS civilization, but it's not the sort of intersection that would delight a mathematician looking for a perfectly spherical or planar boundary. Nevertheless, these monuments define the border, and the no-touching zone follows a connect-the-dots pattern between them. While there are approximately 900 markers along this specific section of the border, there are a total of about 8,000 markers that collectively define the shape of these two nations. Despite this major project, Canada and the United States still have disputed territory. There's a group of islands in the Atlantic that the United States asserts as part of Maine, while Canada claims they belong to New Brunswick. Canada, under the assumption that the islands are rightfully theirs, constructed a lighthouse on one of them. Meanwhile, the United States, also claiming the islands as their own, chooses to ignore the existence of the lighthouse. The disagreement is not a major issue, primarily concerning tourists interested in puffins and fishermen seeking lobsters. However, one must hope for a resolution before the potential discovery of oil beneath that lighthouse, which could escalate the matter. Even in the undisputed territory, there are some notably peculiar spots, such as the weird tick of the border which goes upward into Canada. When you zoom into it in the map, it becomes even more peculiar because the border doesn't follow the contour of solid land, but instead passes through a lake to enclose a portion of Canada before returning to the United States. This area is inhabited by approximately 100 Americans and serves as a prime example of how border irregularities come into existence. In 1783, during negotiations between the Americans and the British, who then controlled the future Canada, they required a map to delineate the borders. The available map at the time, though fairly detailed on the East Coast, became increasingly vague further west. The area in question was the border between what would become Minnesota and Manitoba. Regrettably, this region was hidden beneath an inset on the map, leaving the Americans and British essentially bordering blind. They took an educated guess that the border should commence from the northwestern part of a particular lake and extend in a horizontal line until it intersected the Mississippi River, somewhere. The somewhere turned out to be a bit elusive because the mighty Mississippi River falls short of that line, leaving the border uncertain. They were so convinced they were at the brink of a brilliant solution, but it took 35 years of negotiations for a second round of discussions to finally establish the well-known 49th parallel as the official border. Back in the 18th century, during the French and Indian War, when the British defeated the French, they ended up gaining control of New Brunswick. This led to a more stable and defined border between Maine and New Brunswick. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 formalized this, even though there were some later hiccups. Fast forward to the 19th century and the Aroostook War. Now, even though it wasn't a full-blown war, it did bring a lot of attention to the border region. The tensions and skirmishes during this time prompted both the U.S. and Britain, who controlled Canada, to finally sit down and figure things out. The end result was the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842. This treaty established the official border, which is now the well-known 49th parallel. It was a bit of a compromise, but it put an end to the border disputes. So the Aroostook War, in a way, pushed both sides to resolve the issue once and for all. This whole process might have been a bit of a roller coaster, but it eventually led to a more clearly defined border between Maine and New Brunswick, reducing the uncertainty that had persisted for years. So, in a strange way, these historical conflicts helped make that quirky U.S. Canada border a bit more straightforward. The seemingly non-ending issue with the border stemmed from a high-altitude lake with an irregular shape, shifting the northwestern point unexpectedly. This compelled a border adjustment, resulting in an unusual configuration. And well, you cannot just draw a straight line. Thankfully, Vancouver Island was spared a split, and quirks like Point Roberts and the isolated Canadian island persist. These unique border situations, marked by no-touch zones, show us the importance of clear border markings between neighboring nations.